embedded within it, so settle in. We won't be done anytime very soon. It was Christmas Eve, 1913. Over 104 years ago. I won't be going year by year. The woman's grandfather waited in a dark and dank cell. He had arrived by steamship from India, crossing the ocean to escape colonial rule. But he was not greeted with open arms. U.S. immigration officials took one look at his turban and dark skin, deemed him a criminal, and tossed him in prison. He spent months in detention. And then on Christmas Eve, finally, a white man, a lawyer, filed papers that made him free. Free to do what he had been called to do, to farm. Free to practice his faith as a Sikh, a faith that focuses on love and oneness. And it was in practicing that faith that he found himself tending his own neighbors' farms when they were rounded up and taken to detention centers in our deserts because his neighbors were Japanese Americans. It was that same faith that took him to visit them when others would not. And it was that same faith that accompanied him as he greeted those neighbors when they were released. And that same faith that made sure that their farms were returned to them. Years later, hate would touch this family. Shortly after the fall of the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001, a man that the young woman called Uncle was murdered. Informed by that act of hatred, the lived experience of her grandfather, and focusing on her faith's call to love and oneness, that girl, now woman, became a lawyer and committed herself to fighting detentions, deportations, surveillance, targeted registrations, hate crimes, and racial profiling. She worked tirelessly and still does, filing lawsuits, demonstrating, making films, protesting, with each action fueled by that commitment to love and to oneness. She believed that she was helping transform this nation, our nation, her nation, into a safer, more welcome place for the next generation. Now, years after that memorable Christmas Eve when her grandfather was freed from an unjust imprisonment, the young woman, now a mother, marked a different Christmas Eve. After watching her young son put the requisite milk and cookies by the fire for Santa Claus and head off to bed, she did what many of us have done. She drank the milk and she ate the cookies. She said, I wanted him to wake up and see them gone in the morning. I wanted him to believe in a world that was magical. But I'm leaving my son a world that is more dangerous than the one that I was given. She shared those words in recognition of the increase in hate crimes against boys like hers, boys who are black or brown, boys who may wear a turban as part of their faith. Listen to her words now. And in America today, as we enter an era of enormous rage, as white nationalists hail this moment as their great awakening, as hate acts against Sikhs and our Muslim brothers and sisters are at an all-time high, I know that there will be moments, whether on the streets or in the schoolyards, where my son will be seen as foreign, as suspect, as a terrorist. Just as black bodies are still seen as criminal, brown bodies are still seen as illegal, trans bodies are still seen as immoral, indigenous bodies are still seen as savage, the bodies of women and girls are seen as someone else's property. And when we see these bodies not as brothers or sisters, she writes, then it becomes easier to bully them, to rape them, to allow policies that neglect them, that incarcerate them, that kill them. The future is dark. On this New Year's Eve, she reported, this watch night, I close my eyes and I see the darkness of my grandfather's cell, and I can feel the ever-rising optimism in the Sikh tradition within him. And it is that optimism, friends, that I bring to you today. The woman's name is Valerie Kaur. She is a social activist, filmmaker, and organizer for human rights. She is the Sikh granddaughter of the farmer, and when the man she called uncle was killed following 9/11, she made her first film on hate violence. It was called Divided We Fall. Today, she's one of the bright stars in interfaith organizing and activism. Her work has taken her and brought us to Guantanamo, the sites of mass shootings, inside of massive prison complexes, and done so informed by her faith, therefore with a commitment to love and to oneness. Her work today centers on what she calls and has authored the Revolutionary Love Project. Its mission is we commit to fight for justice through the ethic of love, love for others, our opponents, and ourselves. We are rising up across the U.S. and around the world in protests, music, dance, and direct action to declare that hashtag revolutionary love is the call of our times. Friends, I share now with you, we are in a revolution, and it is not new. Contrast Valerie's call to love with the words just issued from our national office. An office in which hatred remains at the helm and the assaults against the most vulnerable among us continue day after day and often in the wee hours of the night. The same revolution that was raging when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King traveled from state to state for the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. It's the same revolution. In the midst of that campaign, more than 1,000 sanitation workers in Memphis went on strike. They gathered a month into the strike to hear him preach these words, and this is one of the more lengthy readings. You are demonstrating something here that needs to be demonstrated all over the country, all over our country. You are demonstrating that we can stick together, and you are demonstrating that we are all tied in a single garment of destiny, and that if one black person suffers, if one black person is down, we are all down. I've always said that if we are to solve the tremendous problems that we face, we are going to have to unite beyond the religious line. And I'm so happy to know that you have done that in this movement in a supportive role. We have Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Episcopalians, members of the Church of God in Christ, and members of the Church of Christ in God. We are all together, and all the other denominations and religious bodies that I have not mentioned. But there is another great need, and that is to unite beyond class lines. The Negro haves must join hands with the Negro have-nots, and armed with compassionate traveler's checks, they must journey into that other country of their brother's denial and hurt and exploitation. This is what you have done, he told them. You've revealed here that you realize that the no D is as significant as the PhD. That the man who has been to no house is as significant as the man who has been to Morehouse. And I just want to commend you. You are doing things here in this struggle. You are demanding that this city will respect the dignity of labor. So often we overlook the work and significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity. It has dignity and it has worth. One day, our society must come to see this. One day, our society will come to respect the sanitation worker if it is to survive. For the person who picks up our garbage, in the final analysis, is as significant as the physician, for if he doesn't do his job, diseases are rampant. All labor has dignity. But you are doing another thing. You are reminding not only Memphis, but you are reminding the nation that it is a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. And I need not remind you that this is our plight as people all over America. The vast majority of Negroes in our country are still perishing as a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. My friends, we are living as a people in a literal depression. Now you know when there is mass unemployment and underemployment in the black community, they call it a social problem. When there is mass unemployment and underemployment in the white community, they call it a depression. But we find ourselves living in a literal depression all over this country as a people. He went on to say, now the problem is not only unemployment. Do you know that most of the poor people in our country are working every day? And they are making wages so low that they cannot begin to function in the mainstream of economic life of our nation. These are the facts which must be seen. And it is criminal to have people working on a full-time basis and a full-time job getting part-time income. You are here tonight, he told them, to demand that Memphis will do something about the conditions that our brothers face as they work day in and day out for the well-being of the total community. You are here to demand that Memphis will see the poor. End of quote. Doesn't this sound like a not too ancient story? Doesn't it sound like it's present with us today? King went on to share this parable. A man went to hell because he didn't see the poor. His name was Dives. And there was a man by the name of Lazarus who came daily to his gate in need of the basic necessities of life. And Dives didn't do anything about it. And he ended up going to hell. There is nothing in that parable, says King, which says that Dives went to hell because he was rich. Jesus never made a universal indictment against all wealth. King tells us it's true that one day a rich young ruler came to him talking about eternal life, and he advised him to sell all. But in that instance, Jesus was prescribing individual surgery, not setting forth a universal diagnosis. If you will go on, he told them, and read that parable in all of its dimensions and symbolism, you will remember that a conversation took place between heaven and hell. And that on the other end of that long-distance call between heaven and hell was Abraham in heaven talking to Dives in hell. It wasn't a millionaire in hell talking with a poor man in heaven. It was a little millionaire in hell talking with a multi-millionaire in heaven. Dives didn't go to hell because he was rich, notes King. His wealth was his opportunity to bridge the gulf that separated him from his brother Lazarus. Dives went to hell because he passed by Lazarus every day, but he never really saw him. Dives went to hell because he allowed Lazarus to become invisible. Dives went to hell because he allowed the means by which he lived to outdistance the ends for which he lived. Dives went to hell because he maximized the minimum and minimized the maximum. Dives went to hell because He sought to be a conscientious objector in the war against poverty. Thus ends the good Reverend's exegesis of this parable, but not of our situation, which I dare say today is as it was then, and probably worse. King said, I come here to say that America, too, is going to hell if she doesn't use her wealth. If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. And I will hear America through her historians years and generations to come saying, we built gigantic buildings to kiss the skies. We built gargantuan bridges to span the seas. Through our spaceships, we were able to carve highways through the stratosphere. Through our airplanes, we were able to dwarf distance and place time in chains. Through our submarines, we were able to penetrate oceanic depths. And it seems that I can hear the God of the universe saying, even though you've done all of that, I was hungry, and you fed me not. I was naked, and you clothed me not. The children of my sons and daughters were in need of economic security, and you didn't provide it for them. And so you cannot enter the kingdom of greatness. This may well be the indictment on America. Thus ends the words of Martin Luther King Jr. Amen. All these years later, friends, the poor among us are even more so, as the coffers of the rich are increasing by unrestricted magnitudes. In his lifetime, Dr. King spoke of his dream being deferred, that he and other leaders had yet to deliver it. What might he say and think today? But just as the suppression is not new, the revolution continues. The hope that fueled that first Poor People's Campaign is alive and well and gaining momentum as we gather here today. Because there is a Poor People's Campaign today, and it wants you. It wants you, it wants me, and if we are true to our faith, we will respond to the call. And it did not emerge in response to the horrible, horrible racism of our president or his racist policies. It did not become because the Koch brothers and nationalists have gained power. It has come to life because the work remains undone, the revolution is yet to be won, and love will find a way. Love and oneness.
Amen.
On the eve of this past year, the Poor People's Campaign gathered at the historic AME Church in Washington, D.C. The church is considered to be the national cathedral of African Methodism, founded in 1838 with roots in an anti-segregation movement that began in Philadelphia in 1787. Over 200 years ago it began. And it sits mere blocks away from the White House, maintaining a vigilance in the face of our national policies. A house of worship that harbored people who were fleeing enslavement. A house of worship that leads human and civil rights issues still today. On December 31st, 2016, the Reverend William Barber welcomed interfaith leaders into a watch night service. Although the practice of watch night services, which are services that take worshipers through New Year's Eve into the next year, began with Christian Moravians, they are commonly associated with African American congregations and took on monumental meaning on the eve of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. And so they gathered on the eve of the new year, leaving 2016 to go into 2017. religious leaders, African American primarily, but of many faiths and races. And they gathered as the New Poor People's Campaign, and they call us to a moral revival. A moral revival grounded in 12 principles. Among them, a reliance on leadership from the most impacted segments of our country. Beliefs that equal protection under our law is non-negotiable. That no person should live or die in poverty in the richest nation to ever exist. That poverty and economic inequality cannot be understood apart from a society built upon white supremacy. That our criminal system exploits poor communities and it must be dismantled. That we must transform from a war economy to a peace economy that values all humanity. That our transformation must be based upon a narrative of peace, non-violence, localized leadership, bottom-up movements impacting state and local politics in a non-partisan manner. That sustained non-violent civil disobedience will be required, and that the moral narrative has to be shifted from that which is so often promoted by religious extremists in our nation in the form of personal issues like prayer and school, abortion, sexuality, gun rights, property rights, to systemic injustice like how our society treats the poor, those on the margins, the least of these, women, children, workers, immigrants, and the sick. That equality and representation under the law, a desire for peace, love, and harmony within and among all nations has to be a priority. A vital piece of this revolution is that it exists in the context of being for something rather than against something. In Reverend William Barber's words, not against Trump, but for an agenda that goes far beyond Washington, D.C. And this is where the place where our faith comes into play. It is so easy to be upset by words and deeds from the Oval Office. But we have a choice. To let our surface level emotions get angry and lead us to vent and to seethe, or to let our soul level convictions help move us forward to what is right and what is possible. Dr. King called us to that faithful, soulful, led response rooted in love and oneness. And Reverend Barber calls us there today, and so do I. The struggle is getting so real for all of us if it hasn't felt that way before. It's close to home, it's personal, and it's messy. Some might find it at best uncomfortable and at worst frightening. Just this past week, here in Marblehead, I have heard leaders blame us for the hatred we experienced last month. Just last night on social media, I witnessed Marblehead residents trash the Marblehead racial justice team, calling it a cult. And I watched people who spoke up about racism in Marblehead literally silenced. I just learned of one more today. Add to this, churches on the North Shore and Boston area are being called to provide asylum for people previously protected by immigration policies, not just the undocumented, but people who have been here for years and have been following the rules, now threatened to be ripped away from their families. And just the other night, I gave a man from El Salvador a ride to Swampscott, because I feared what might happen if he had to walk through these streets alone. Guilty only of falling asleep on the bus, missing his stop, landing here at night, and guilty of not knowing a second language well. And then the list of horrible actions, I promise I'll end on joy. Then the list of horrible actions happening in our state houses and in our national offices. And then the words that I will not repeat from this pulpit that came out of the mouths of our president. But I will tell you, not so unlike those that came from a local leader of power just 2 months ago in the Holy Oak Room. I find my very, very slow to anger self angry. And so I share this message with you today because I need to hear it too. The struggle is more real than it has felt in my lifetime, perhaps yours. And how do we as a people of faith move forward? Well, we have more to learn from Valerie, that young Sikh woman. So I return us to her story now, as it was shared at that watch meeting where the Poor People's Campaign met on the eve going into 2017. You'll recall that she had come to the sad realization that her son was growing up in a world that felt to her less safe than the one she had grown up on her parents' farm. That despite her grandfather's detention upon his arrival here, and despite the internment of the Japanese Americans, this, she feels, is a less safe world. Yet remember, her faith leads her to optimism and this powerful vision she shared. So the mother in me asked, what if? What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but it is the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a country that is waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What if all of our grandmothers and grandfathers are standing behind now? Those who survived occupation and genocide, slavery, Jim Crow, detentions, and political assault. What if they're whispering in our ears, "You are brave"? What if this is our nation's greatest transition? What does the midwife tell us to do, she asked. Breathe. And then push. Because if we don't push, we will die. And if we don't push, our nation will die. Tonight we breathe, she told the gathered community. And tomorrow we will labor in love, through love. And your revolutionary love is the magic that we will show our children. Imagine that, friends, as you hear her words. On the cusp of our nation's greatest transition? Not a re-energization of the first Poor People's Campaign, or a recommitment even to Dr. King's dream. Rather, significant and lasting movement forward. An acknowledgement that this has been the call all along. Not just since the 1960s when the Civil Rights Movement took place, not just since 1913 when Valerie's grandfather was set free, and not even just since the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, but since the birth of all religions calling us to love and oneness.
Amen.
Pastor Tracy Blackman was also at this watch night service. As UCC minister, arrived ready to preach, but she ditched her sermon because of the events of that day. She told of getting a call early in the day because a 50-year-old homeless man had just taken his own life. He was hanging outside. He saw no reason to enter into 2017. She went, and she witnessed. She saw his meager belongings strewn all over the street near him. And then she had to leave, I don't recall why, but had to leave for a very short time. And she was stunned to return and see no sign of him at all. Nothing to reflect that this man had died, let alone lived. No sign that here was a man who gave up hope on this last day of 2016. She said that the memory burned her throughout the day, and as she headed for this watch night, the memory of this man and his circumstance so present with her, another watch night came to mind. Her words. A watch night where Jesus took his boys and asked them to wait just a little while he went further to prepare for the final revolutionary act. And they fell asleep. So my message to you, she said, is what the young people say to me: stay woke. My scripture tells me it didn't just happen once, it didn't just happen twice, but 3 times. They fell asleep, and my fear is, my friends, that now that November 8th, remembering this was right after that, has come and gone, that some of us are going to fall asleep. My fear is that those of us who may still lead a relatively comfortable life are going to fall asleep. And the call I issue to you today is to stay woke. Now, woke, she told them, involves work. It's not just about your eyes being open, but it's your willingness to engage in the struggle. This is what woke looks like, she said. Even if there is food on my table, I'm going to stay in the fight for those who are hungry until there is food on their table too. Woke looks like if I have insurance on my job, I'm going to fight for affordable health care insurance for everybody. Woke looks like me to continue to fight for a living wage for every person who works in these ununited states. Woke looks like if there's going to be a registry, I'm going to be on it. Woke looks like continuing to challenge poor and black people in the United States. Woke, the condition of poor and black people in these United States. Woke looks like standing for the same rights and protections for my lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people as I do for myself. Woke looks like if you can come over here on a boat, somebody else can too.
That's right.
Woke looks like not allowing you to remove the rights to vote that my ancestors worked so hard for me to have. She called upon her people in that gathering, people of all faiths, noting that they were better at praying than watching and staying woke. And perhaps we as Unitarian Universalists should take that to heart, however we understand praying to occur. To stay woke, to watch out for all our siblings, all of them, whether we look alike, think alike, parent alike, move through the world alike, whether we do anything alike at all or nothing, to take the unique opportunity to be strong. What Pastor Blackman said was requiring that if they come for one, they come for us all.
That's right.
Friends, whether this is God's agenda or the humanist agenda that speaks to your soul and keeps you on the path toward good in your life with love and a commitment to oneness, I beg you to join me, help each other to stay woke, to be bold and strong in our convictions. Things seem to be getting messier. I can't remember, literally cannot remember the last time I was angry in my life, and I woke this morning angry. But as Reverend Barber says, we know we're doing something right because Breitbart is already hitting us. And I believe that Valerie is correct. It's happening. Something big. Let it be something brave and let us be brave on the journey. We can do this. At that watch night service on the eve of 2017, the interfaith community, including Valerie and Reverend Barbara, and the pastor, and many others, Muslims, Native Americans, Unitarian Universalists, Reverend Rob Hardy's was there. They rose in body and spirit, and they sang a song. And I invite us to do the same, reminding ourselves that although there is great power in our unity, it requires each of us to stand or sit proudly, proclaiming that we are woke, that our own lights will not be extinguished, nor will we let our neighbors. As we march forward together into the world in which Valerie need not worry about the safety of her child, and no mother need worry about the safety of theirs. A world of love, a world of oneness. Please join me as we sing This Little Light of Mine.